You weren't this fat when we first got together, Joe. You weren't this big, and I was attracted to you then. But now, I don't know, it's just too much. Joe felt his chest tighten, a lump forming in his throat. He had tried so hard to make his wife happy, to be the man she needed, and yet it felt like nothing he did was enough. Joe and Mildred had just exchanged vows, promising to love each other forever. Their wedding day was nothing short of magical, filled with joy, laughter, and the excitement of a new beginning. Now they were on their honeymoon, staying in a luxurious hotel that overlooked the sparkling sea. The room was beautiful, with soft golden lights and rose petals scattered across the bed. Joe, a wealthy and successful man, couldn't stop smiling at his new wife, Mildred. She was everything he had ever dreamed of, beautiful, graceful, and kind. As they sat by the window, looking at the sun setting over the ocean, Joe felt an overwhelming sense of love and desire. He turned to Mildred, his heart racing. "Mildred," he said softly, "it's our first night together as husband and wife. I have been waiting for this moment, for us to truly connect." Mildred smiled, her eyes twinkling with affection, but there was a hint of hesitation in her voice. She quickly placed a hand on Joe's chest, stopping him. "Joe, I need to tell you something," she said nervously. "My period just started. I feel uncomfortable right now." Joe paused, his face showing concern. "Oh, I didn't know. I'm sorry," he said, pulling back slightly. He tried to hide his disappointment, but there was a strange feeling growing inside him. He had been eager to share this special night with his wife, and now it seemed that their plans had to change. Mildred, sensing the shift in the air, quickly changed the subject. "But we can still enjoy our time together, Joe. Let's relax, talk, and maybe take a walk by the beach." Joe nodded, trying to put aside his feelings, but deep down, something didn't sit right. He was sure Mildred wasn't telling him everything. Was there more to this than just a simple excuse? He decided to play along for now, but he couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that something was off. 4 days had passed since that awkward night. Joe tried to push away the thoughts that lingered in his mind, but the feeling of uncertainty had only grown stronger. He loved Mildred with all his heart, and he trusted her, but something about her repeated excuses didn't sit well with him. It was another warm evening, the hotel room filled with the soft sounds of the waves crashing against the shore. Mildred was sitting by the window, gazing out at the ocean. Joe, on the other hand, had spent the whole day trying to relax, but the question on his mind kept resurfacing. He walked up to Mildred, taking a deep breath. "Mildred, can we talk?" She turned around, offering him a soft smile. "Of course, Joe. What's on your mind?" "I've been patient, baby. I really have," Joe began, his voice filled with both tenderness and frustration. "But it's been 4 days now, and you've told me you're still on your period. You know, I don't mind, but—" Mildred interrupted him, her eyes widening. "Joe, please don't say that. You must be out of your mind." Joe frowned, his voice trembling with a mix of confusion and hurt. "I thought your period usually lasts for 3 days, Mildred. Why is this one different? Could it be something else?" Mildred's face turned pale, and she quickly looked away. "It's because of the wedding stress, Joe. All the planning, the excitement, it just messed with my body." Joe could sense that she was not being entirely honest. The frustration in him built up, and before he could stop himself, the words spilled out. "Is it because of my body size, Mildred? Is it because I'm fat that you're rejecting me now? I thought you loved me. I thought our love was stronger than this." Mildred's face softened immediately. She reached out to him, taking his hands in hers. "Baby, don't say that. You know I love you. You know I never cared about your body size or anything like that. I'm not after your money. I married you because I love you, Joe. You are everything to me." Joe's eyes searched her face, looking for the truth. "But then why, Mildred? Why is there always an excuse? I don't want to feel like I'm being pushed away." Tears welled up in Mildred's eyes as she shook her head. "Please, Joe, you have to believe me. I've been under a lot of pressure, with the wedding and everything. I'm not used to being in this situation, and I didn't want to disappoint you. It's not you, it's me. I'm just trying to figure things out." Joe felt a pang in his chest. He had always believed that love was enough to overcome anything, but now he wasn't sure. The doubt in his heart had grown too strong to ignore. The next morning, after a night of emotional conversation, Mildred felt restless. She woke up early, quietly slipping out of bed so as not to disturb Joe, who was still asleep. She wanted some time alone to clear her mind and process everything that had been said the night before. Joe, however, woke up a little later and found her side of the bed empty. He looked around the room and saw her things had been left behind, a sign that she had gone out. Concerned, he got dressed quickly and headed down to the hotel lobby. He spotted Mildred just as she was walking toward the door, about to leave the hotel. "Mildred," Joe called out, rushing over to her. "Where are you going? I thought we agreed to spend the day together." Mildred paused for a moment, turning to face him with a forced smile. "I just need some time alone, Joe. Please don't follow me. I'll be fine." Joe looked at her, feeling a twinge of disappointment. "I understand, but can I at least come with you? I don't like the thought of you being out there alone." She hesitated for a moment, then shook her head. "No, Joe, I really want to be alone today. Please, let me have this." Joe nodded reluctantly, his heart heavy with worry. "Okay, but promise me you'll be careful." "I will," she said softly, before walking out the door and heading down the street. Mildred's steps felt heavy as she walked away from Joe, her mind clouded with doubts and uncertainties. She wasn't sure what to do anymore. The feeling of guilt weighed on her, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the feelings of frustration that had been building up since the night of their wedding. She wandered through the streets, her mind lost in thought, until she reached a cozy restaurant with a small outdoor seating area. She entered and found a quiet corner where she could sit alone. Pulling out her phone, she dialed the number of her best friend, Paulina. The phone rang for a moment before Paulina picked up. Hey, my newly wedded bride. I know you must be enjoying this honeymoon by now. How's everything going with your handsome, honorable husband? Have you two done what couples do?" she teased. Mildred let out a sigh, trying to keep her voice steady. "Actually, no, Paulina. We haven't done anything. And to be honest, I don't think I ever will." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What do you mean? Didn't you marry him because you were in love with him?" Paulina asked, her voice suddenly serious. Mildred rubbed her temples, feeling a tightness in her chest. "I didn't marry him because of love, Paulina. I married him because of everything he's given me, all the money he spent on me. He's rich, and I thought that was enough. But now I realize I don't even find him attractive. He's too big, too heavy. He doesn't take care of himself, and it's just not what I imagined." Paulina was quiet for a moment, shocked by what she was hearing. "Mildred, this isn't right," she finally said, her voice filled with concern. "You can't marry a man for his money and then talk about him like that. You should have told him the truth from the start. You can't just be with him for his wealth." Mildred felt defensive, but there was a nagging feeling in the back of her mind that made her pause. "I don't know, Paulina. What do you expect me to do? I can't leave him now, not after everything he's done for me. But honestly, I just don't think I can be with someone like him. He's too fat. He can't even exercise or take care of his health. I don't think he's going to change." Paulina's voice became firmer. "Mildred, you can't keep going on like this. If you're not happy, you need to make a choice. Either be honest with him about how you feel, or let him go. If you really care about him, you should want him to be healthy. Not just for you, but for himself too. You can't just ignore his well-being because he has money." Mildred's heart clenched. She knew Paulina was right, but the truth was difficult to face. "I don't know if I can tell him, Paulina. What if he hates me? What if he thinks I'm only with him for his money? It's just too complicated." Paulina's tone softened, but there was still a hint of frustration. "Mildred, you should never have married him if you didn't love him. Now you're stuck in a situation that could hurt both of you. You need to be honest with him, even if it's hard." Mildred remained silent for a long moment, looking out the window at the busy streets below. Her mind was swirling with emotions, torn between guilt, frustration, and fear. She knew she needed to make a decision, but the thought of confronting Joe seemed overwhelming. Finally, Paulina spoke again, her voice gentle but firm. "Mildred, I'm not happy about what you're doing, but I'm here for you. Whatever you decide, you need to figure it out soon. Don't let this continue, okay?" Mildred nodded silently, then slowly hung up the phone. She sat back in her chair, lost in thought. The honeymoon had come to an end, and as they returned home, The weight of the unspoken tension between Joe and Mildred seemed to settle around them. Joe tried his best to remain hopeful. He loved Mildred deeply and had hoped that their time away together would help mend the cracks that were starting to show in their marriage. But as the days passed, it became clear that things weren't as they should be. Mildred remained distant, her heart not fully invested in the relationship, while Joe found himself desperately trying to find ways to win her back, to make her see him the way he saw her. Someone worthy of love, no matter his size. One afternoon, feeling determined, Joe went out and bought the most expensive bags, shoes and jewelry he could find, thinking that these grand gestures might win her affection. He placed them carefully on their bed, each one more luxurious than the last, hoping that perhaps the sparkle of gold and leather would catch her eye and melt her heart. That night, after a nice dinner and some gentle conversation, Joe felt his chance had finally come. He had made sure everything was perfect, just the way he thought she would like it. The room was lit with soft candles, and the air was filled with the scent of roses. Mildred had been unusually quiet all evening, lost in her own thoughts. She looked at the beautiful gifts Joe had bought for her, but didn't seem as excited as he'd hoped. She didn't even smile as she picked up one of the bags, her face unreadable. Joe, trying to be optimistic, gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "Mildred," he began, his voice low and tender, "I love you, and I just want to be close to you. Let's not let this distance between us keep growing. I'm willing to do anything to make things right." Mildred sighed deeply and turned her gaze toward him. "Joe, we've been over this before." Joe's heart sank, but he gathered his courage. "I know we've had our problems, but I'm trying, Mildred. I really am. Please, let's make this work." Mildred glanced at him for a moment before shaking her head. "You're too fat, Joe. I just can't." Joe froze, the words hitting him like a slap to the face. He had expected rejection, but not like this. Not so cold, so blunt. His heart twisted in pain as he tried to process what she had just said. The hope he had been clinging to slowly faded. He looked at her, unable to hide the hurt in his eyes. "You weren't like this when I met you, Mildred. You seemed to love me for who I was. What happened? Why now?" Mildred turned away, her voice barely a whisper. "You weren't this fat when we first got together, Joe. You weren't this big, and I was attracted to you then. But now, I don't know. It's just too much." Joe felt his chest tighten, a lump forming in his throat. He had tried so hard to make her happy, to be the man she needed, and yet it felt like nothing he did was enough. The love he had given her, the sacrifices he made, all seemed to be for nothing. His heart shattered as he stared at her, desperate for an answer. "Then why did you marry me, Mildred?" His voice cracked, and the pain was unmistakable. "If you feel this way about me, why did you marry me in the first place?" Mildred remained silent, her gaze fixed on the floor. Joe's words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment neither of them spoke. His question echoed in her mind, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. She had no answer, no excuse that would make sense. Joe took a deep breath and stood up, his legs shaking. He felt like his world was crumbling around him. "I love you, Mildred," he said softly, trying to keep his emotions in check. "But I can't keep pretending that this is okay. If you don't love me for who I am, then maybe it's time for us to be honest with each other." Mildred remained motionless, her face unreadable. Joe's heart ached as he took a step back. "I don't want a relationship where I have to change who I am just to be loved. If you can't accept me as I am, then maybe we shouldn't be together." Mildred's eyes widened and she stood up, rushing toward him. "Joe, please don't say that. I don't want to lose you, but I don't know how to deal with this. I thought I could accept you, but I'm scared. I'm scared that I'll never be truly happy with you." Joe shook his head. "You're not the only one who's scared, Mildred. I've been trying so hard to make this work, but I can't keep giving when I feel like you're not giving anything back. Love isn't supposed to feel like this. It shouldn't hurt this much." There was a long silence before Joe slowly turned and walked out of the room, his heart heavy with sorrow. Mildred watched him leave, a mix of guilt and confusion swirling within her. Mildred sat on the couch, her phone pressed to her ear, her mind racing with confusion and regret. She couldn't believe the words that had just left Joe's mouth, the hurt, the disappointment in his eyes. It was too much to bear. But then again, her mind kept drifting back to the things she wanted. The bags, the jewelry, the lifestyle Joe had given her. She wasn't ready to let it go. Not yet. Not when she hadn't even begun to enjoy everything he had to offer. She called Paulina, her best friend, hoping for some comfort, even though deep down she knew she was about to pour out something that might push Paulina away. But she needed to talk, to make sense of it all. "Paulina," Mildred's voice trembled as she spoke. "Joe just said the worst things to me. He said he loves me, but it's like he's giving up on me. He said I don't love him and I don't even care. What do I do?" Paulina, on the other end, sighed heavily. She had heard enough about Joe and Mildred's rocky relationship to know that this wasn't going to be easy. But the words Mildred spoke next sent a chill down her spine. "I don't want to lose him, Paulina," Mildred continued. "You know how much he spends on me. His money, Paulina. It's everything. I love that man's money. I can't lose all that. He's been buying me everything I want, and now I'm just stuck." Paulina's voice was firm, laced with anger. "Mildred, this is wrong. You can't keep doing this. Just divorce him. Haven't you saved enough money by now? You've been living the high life for months, and you've done nothing but take from him. Haven't you learned anything?" Mildred hesitated. "No, Paulina, you don't get it. I spent everything Joe gave me. Everything. I spent it all on my family, on expensive things. The clothes, the shoes, the spa days. There's nothing left, not a single penny. And now Joe's acting like I'm some sort of burden. I need him to give me more, a lot more." Paulina was furious. "Be careful, Mildred. This isn't love. You're playing with someone's heart, someone who truly cares about you. You need to stop this before you hurt him even more." Mildred, however, was already lost in her own world of plans and schemes. "I just want to trick him into giving me more money. Once I get it, I'll dump him and go back to my ex. You know, the one who's been begging me to come back. He's so desperate for me. And Joe is so dumb. He doesn't even know what's happening." Paulina, disgusted by the words coming out of her friend's mouth, scoffed. "Mildred, this is not okay. Just think about it. Look at how you're treating somebody's son, somebody who loves you despite everything. You're using him for money. What kind of person does that make you?" Mildred was too far gone to listen. She shrugged. "You don't understand, Paulina. Joe's so stupid. He's so fat and dirty sometimes. I mean, can you believe it? He doesn't even take a bath properly. He smells sometimes, and it's like he doesn't even care about himself. Can you imagine? A man with all that money, and he can't even manage himself properly." Paulina's voice dropped, her patience thinning. "Mildred, this is crazy. You're complaining about him not taking care of himself when you're using him like this. You're the one who's dirty inside. You're just using him to fill the emptiness in your life. It's wrong, and deep down, you know it." Mildred sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "Well, what do you want me to do? I don't want to lose him. But I also don't want to settle for less. I mean, come on, Paulina. Joe is big, he's sloppy, and he doesn't even know how to treat me right. He needs to change if we're going to make this work." Paulina was done. "Mildred, you need to think about this long and hard. You're playing with fire, and I don't think you'll like what happens when you get burned. You have no idea what real love looks like, and Joe, despite everything, might just be the one person who truly cares about you. But you're too blind to see it." Mildred, feeling defensive and a little panicked, cut her off. "I don't need a lecture, Paulina. I just need advice. Joe's not going to change, and I don't have time to wait for him to figure things out. I'm going to get what I need from him, and then I'll move on to something better. It's not that complicated." Paulina was quiet for a moment, thinking about the girl she had once known. Ambitious and full of dreams, but now a stranger, consumed by greed. "Fine," she said slowly, "but don't come crying to me when everything falls apart, because it will. And when it does, you'll have nobody to blame but yourself." Mildred's heart raced as she hung up the phone, her thoughts a whirlwind of plans, excuses, and the desire to hold on to everything Joe had given her. She wasn't ready to let go of the luxury, the glamour, or the promise of more money. She didn't care about the consequences. Not yet. Joe sat at his desk, his mind clouded with confusion and hurt. He stared at the phone in his hand, feeling like he needed to talk to someone. someone who would understand. So he dialed Paulina's number, hoping that maybe, just maybe, she could help him make sense of everything. "Maybe I can give you some advice. I've been watching from the outside, and I think I have an idea of what's going on." Joe agreed, knowing that talking to Paulina might bring him some clarity. "All right, I'll meet you later. I just need to understand what's happening with her." Later that evening, Joe and Paulina met at a cozy restaurant, the kind of place where people came to unwind and share their troubles. They sat down at a quiet table, away from the hustle of the restaurant, and Joe began to tell Paulina everything. How Mildred had been rejecting him, how she had made him feel as if he wasn't good enough, and how hurt he was by her constant disregard for his feelings. Paulina listened carefully, nodding as Joe spoke. When he finished, she took a deep breath, then spoke softly. "Joe, I know this isn't easy for you, but have you ever thought about making some changes? Maybe for yourself? I know this is hard to hear, but maybe you should think about going to the gym." Joe raised an eyebrow, a bit surprised by the suggestion. "The gym? What are you talking about, Paulina? I mean, I know I'm not in the best shape, but you think going to the gym is going to fix things?" Paulina smiled gently, not wanting to offend him. "I'm not saying you're not good enough the way you are, but Joe, sometimes we need to make changes for ourselves, not just for others. You've been so focused on making Mildred happy, but maybe it's time to focus on yourself. A healthier lifestyle could help you feel better, more confident. And who knows, maybe it'll help your relationship too. But please don't take this the wrong way. It's just an idea." Joe sat back in his chair, letting her words sink in. He had always been a little self-conscious about his size, but he had never really done anything about it. Deep down, he knew that Mildred's rejection wasn't just about his weight, but he also knew that it was something he could control. He smiled faintly. "It's fine, Paulina, I'm not offended. I'll think about it. I know Mildred has never spoken to me like this before. It hurts, but maybe I need to change too. I've been so focused on giving her everything. I forgot about myself." Paulina's face softened with sympathy. "I'm glad you're not taking it personally, Joe, and I'm proud of you for considering it. Sometimes we get so caught up in trying to please others that we lose sight of who we are and what we need. Don't forget that your happiness matters too." Joe nodded, feeling a weight lifted off his shoulders. He appreciated Paulina's honesty. It was something he hadn't been able to see for himself. "Thank you, Paulina. I really needed to hear that. I'll take your advice to heart. Maybe it's time for me to do something about my health, and in turn, it might help me understand how to handle this situation with Mildred. Maybe if I work on myself, I'll be better for her. Or for anyone, really." Paulina smiled warmly, relieved to see Joe open to change. "I think that's a great step, Joe. Just don't forget, you deserve someone who loves you for who you are. Whether Mildred can see that or not, you are worth more than the way she's been treating you." Joe smiled, feeling a bit lighter. "You're right, Paulina. I guess I've been so caught up in trying to make things work, I forgot that I deserve happiness too." Later that night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't help but think about Paulina's words. It wasn't just about losing weight, it was about rediscovering himself. Joe made a silent promise to take better care of himself, not just for Mildred, but for him. It was time to stop living for others and start living for himself. The next morning, Joe woke up with a new sense of determination. He had always been a man who put his family first, but now he was going to put himself first. He wasn't going to let Mildred's treatment of him define who he was. If he was going to change, it was going to be on his own terms. Soon, Mildred started sleeping with her ex-boyfriend, Jackson. Whenever Jackson needed money, Mildred would lie to Joe, claiming she needed it for personal or family expenses. Joe, still blinded by his love for her, never questioned her requests. "Joe, I need some money to help my mom fix the roof in her house," Mildred said one evening, batting her eyelashes. Without hesitation, Joe reached for his wallet. "How much do you need, baby?" $5,000 should cover it, Mildred replied, trying to sound casual. Joe handed her the money without a second thought. "Anything for you, Mildred." The moment Joe left for work the next morning, Mildred was on the phone with Jackson. "Hey babe," she said sweetly, "I got the money. Meet me at the usual spot." Jackson laughed. "You're too good at this, Mildred. That fool really believes you love him." They met at a fancy restaurant later that day. Mildred handed him the cash, and Jackson spent it lavishly, buying expensive clothes and treating her to the finest meals. They laughed and joked about Joe, mocking his trust and love. "Imagine him thinking you're actually fixing a roof," Jackson said, shaking his head. Mildred giggled. "He's such a fool, baby, but honestly, I can't stand him anymore. The way he breathes, the way he eats, it's unbearable. If it wasn't for his money, I would have left long ago." Jackson leaned back, smiling. "So when are you leaving him for good?" "Soon," Mildred replied, "but I need to milk him for a bit more. I still need to pay off some family debts." Back at home, Joe started noticing Mildred's increasing distance. She was always on her phone, always stepping out for urgent errands, and rarely spent any time with him. When he brought it up, Mildred would brush him off with excuses. "Joe, I'm just stressed," she said one evening when he tried to talk to her. "There's so much going on with my family." "I don't have time for your complaints right now." Joe nodded, feeling defeated. He didn't want to argue with her, so he let it slide, hoping things would get better. But things only got worse. Mildred's lies grew bolder, and Joe's savings started dwindling as she continued funneling money to Jackson. One day, Joe overheard a snippet of her phone conversation while she was in the kitchen. "Don't worry, babe. I will get more money from him tonight," she said in a low voice. Joe froze. He couldn't shake off what he had overheard. Mildred's words kept playing in his mind. That night, as she slept, he decided to check her phone. He hated the idea of invading her privacy, but he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in his heart. Unlocking her phone, he found messages between Mildred and someone saved as Jay. The conversation was shocking. "Jay, how much did you get from him this time?" Mildred replied, $10,000. "I will transfer it to you in the morning." Joe didn't even hesitate. "He's such a fool." Jay, "Good girl, meet me tomorrow night." Mildred replied, "Of course, babe, I can't wait to see you." Joe felt his heart shatter. He scrolled further, finding more messages and pictures that confirmed his worst fears. Mildred wasn't just lying to him, she was in a full-blown affair with her ex. The next morning, Joe confronted her. He waited until she was about to leave for one of her supposed errands. "Mildred," Joe said, his voice cold, "who's Jay?" Mildred froze, her face betraying her guilt for a split second before she quickly composed herself. "Jay? I don't know what you are talking about," she said, avoiding his eyes. "Don't lie to me," Joe snapped, slamming her phone down on the table with the messages open. "I know everything, Mildred. You've been taking my money and giving it to your ex-boyfriend. You have been cheating on me." Mildred's eyes darted to the phone, and she sighed, dropping the pretense. "Fine," she said coldly. "Yes, I've been seeing Jackson. And so what? You think I'd stay with you forever? Look at yourself, Joe. You're fat, lazy, and boring. I'm tired of pretending." Joe's hands shook as he tried to process her words. "If you felt that way, why didn't you just leave me? Why marry me in the first place?" Mildred smiled, her voice dripping with cruelty. "Because you're rich, Joe, and I needed your money. But now I've had enough. I'm leaving." She grabbed her bag and walked out, leaving Joe standing there, broken and defeated. Paulina came over later that day after Joe called her, his voice heavy with despair. He explained everything, from the messages to Mildred's cruel words. Paulina listened, her heart aching for her friend. "Joe," she said gently, "you can't let this break you. Mildred isn't worth your tears. She was using you, and now that she's gone, you can finally focus on yourself. Don't let her win." Joe nodded, wiping his tears. "You're right, Paulina. I won't let her destroy me. I'll make her regret ever leaving me." "Good," Paulina said with a small smile. "And the first step? You're going to start going to the gym. Not for her, but for you. It's time to take care of yourself." Joe hesitated. "The gym?" "I don't know, Paulina. I've never been good at that sort of thing." Paulina laughed lightly. "Joe, I'll come with you if I have to, but trust me, you'll feel better once you start. It's not just about losing weight, it's about building confidence and taking control of your life." Joe nodded again, this time with determination. "All right, let's do it. I'm ready to change." The next morning, Joe woke up with a newfound determination. Paulina picked him up, and together they went to the gym. It was Joe's first time stepping into a place like that, and he felt a mix of embarrassment and intimidation as he saw people lifting weights and running on treadmills with ease. Paulina nudged him gently. Relax, Joe. Everyone here started somewhere. No one's judging you. Joe nodded but still felt out of place. A trainer approached them and smiled warmly. First time, he asked. Joe nodded. Yeah. And I don't even know where to start. Don't worry, man, the trainer said. I'll help you ease into it. We'll take it one step at a time. The first week was rough. Joe's body ached in ways he never thought possible. He struggled to keep up, and more than once he thought about quitting. But Paulina was always there, encouraging him and pushing him to keep going. Come on, Joe, she'd say during their sessions. You're stronger than you think. One more rep. I think I'm dying, Joe would groan, making Paulina burst into laughter. If you can survive Mildred, you can survive this, she joked, lightening the mood. Slowly but surely, Joe began to see progress. The weights didn't feel as heavy anymore, and he could run on the treadmill without gasping for air. Paulina noticed the change, not just in his body, but in his confidence. Look at you, she said one day, grinning. I'm proud of you, Joe. You're really putting in the work. Joe smiled. Thanks, Paulina. I feel good. For the first time in a long time, I actually feel good about myself. Months turned into a year, and Joe's transformation was nothing short of incredible. The man who once struggled to climb stairs without breaking a sweat was now fit, confident, and radiating energy. People began to notice, including those at his workplace. Joe, is that you? One of his colleagues exclaimed during a meeting. You look amazing. Thanks, Joe said, his smile genuine. Even Paulina couldn't hide her admiration. You're a whole new person, Joe. I'm so proud of you. Couldn't have done it without you, Joe replied. Meanwhile, Mildred's life wasn't going as planned. After leaving Joe, she moved in with Jackson, thinking their life would be perfect. But Jackson turned out to be nothing like she had imagined. Where's the money? Jackson snapped one day when Mildred mentioned she was broke. I told you I don't have any, she said nervously. I've been spending on us, remember? Jackson laughed coldly. You're useless without money, Mildred. I'm not here to support you. The relationship quickly soured, and Mildred found herself regretting her choices. She tried to reach out to Joe, hoping he would take her back. But when she saw Joe again, she was speechless. He looked nothing like the man she had left. He was confident, charming, and fit. Joe, she said, her voice trembling, I made a mistake. Can we try again? Joe looked at her, his expression unreadable. Mildred, he said calmly, I have moved on. You should too. Mildred stared at Joe, her heart sinking. His calm demeanor and confident tone unnerved her. What do you mean you've moved on? Who is this person? She demanded, her voice shaky. Joe crossed his arms, a small smile playing on his lips. You don't need to know right now, Mildred. Just know that she's someone who truly values me, someone who saw my worth even when I didn't see it myself. Mildred's face twisted in frustration. Joe, I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. Don't throw away what we had. Joe's smile faded, replaced by a serious expression. What we had, he repeated. Mildred, there was nothing to throw away. You never loved me. You loved my money. And you made that very clear when you walked out on me. Mildred reached out to touch his arm, but Joe stepped back. Please, Joe, she pleaded. I'll do better. I'll change. Just give me another chance. Joe shook his head. You've already had your chances, Mildred, and you chose to betray me. I deserve better, and now I know I can have better. Later that evening, Joe called Paulina and invited her over for dinner. He wanted to talk to her, and he knew it was time to be honest about his feelings. When Paulina arrived, she found Joe in the kitchen, preparing a meal. She laughed as she stepped inside. Wow, look at you, Chef Joe. Since when did you learn how to cook? Joe grinned. Since I realized I needed to take care of myself in every way possible. Sit down, Paulina. I have something to tell you. Paulina raised an eyebrow, but sat at the dining table. What's going on, Joe? Joe served the food and sat across from her, his hands resting on the table. Paulina, I don't know how to say this, but you've been my rock through everything. When Mildred broke me, you were there. When I wanted to give up, you pushed me. You saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. Paulina's cheeks flushed, and she looked down at her plate. Joe, you don't have to say all that. I was just being a good friend. Joe reached out and took her hand. It's more than that, Paulina. I've fallen in love with you. Paulina's eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I'm not expecting you to feel the same way, Joe continued. I just needed to tell you how I feel. You deserve to know. Paulina finally found her voice. Joe, I don't know what to say. This is unexpected. Joe nodded, his smile soft. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. Paulina sat there processing Joe's words. Her heart raced, but there was a warmth in her chest she hadn't expected. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. The old Joe, the one who was hurt, uncertain, and broken, was gone. The man sitting in front of her was confident, strong, and someone who had finally learned to value himself. I'm glad you told me, Joe, she said quietly, her eyes softening. But I want you to know that I care about you too. I always have, but I wasn't sure if I was the one for you after everything that's happened. Joe leaned forward, his gaze intense yet kind. Paulina, I don't want to rush you into anything. I just need you to know that I'm serious about this. You've been there for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. You believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. Paulina looked down at their hands, her fingers gently brushing against his. You've changed, Joe, and I see that now. I see the man you've become, and I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you. Joe's heart swelled with emotion, and a smile spread across his face. I've never heard you say that before. Thank you, Paulina. She returned his smile, but there was a moment of hesitation. But Joe, what about Mildred? Are you really ready to let go of everything that happened? Joe looked away for a moment, his thoughts drifting to his past with Mildred. He'd loved her, even when she hadn't loved him the way he deserved. But now he knew that he had to let go of the past in order to embrace the future. I've let go of her, he said firmly. I've forgiven her, but I've also forgiven myself. I deserve someone who values me for who I am, not for what I have. And I think you might just be that person, Paulina. Paulina felt a rush of warmth and something deeper, a connection that went beyond friendship. Joe, I want to be that person. I've been there for you as a friend, but I want to be there for you as something more, if you will have me. Joe's eyes sparkled with a mix of excitement and relief. I'd love that, Paulina. I have wanted that for a long time. Meanwhile, Mildred was sitting in her apartment, feeling the weight of her decisions. She had spent days thinking about Joe, wondering if she had made a huge mistake. But her pride wouldn't allow her to reach out. After all, she had everything she thought she wanted: money, comfort, and the life she had always dreamed of. But then why did it feel like she had lost something priceless? Her phone buzzed, and when she checked it, she saw a message from an old acquaintance. Hey, Mildred, I heard about Joe. He's been spotted with Paulina. What's going on there? Mildred's heart skipped. She had suspected something was happening between them, but seeing it written out made the reality hit harder than she had imagined. She typed back quickly, I don't care. He's nothing to me now. 5 months later, Joe and Paulina were married in a beautiful ceremony, surrounded by close friends and family. It was a day filled with joy, love, and celebration, a stark contrast to the emptiness Joe once felt. Paulina stood by his side, smiling, her heart full of love for the man who had become everything she had always hoped for. They had supported each other through difficult times, and now they were starting a new chapter together. News of their marriage quickly spread, and Mildred, who had been living her life without Joe, heard about it. The news hit her like a wave, and for the first time in months, she sat still, reflecting on everything that had happened. Her mind replayed the moments she had spent with Joe, the times he had been kind, the times he had loved her unconditionally. And she began to realize that in her pursuit of wealth and comfort, she had lost something far more valuable: true love. Mildred couldn't believe it. She had let her pride, selfishness, and superficial desires drive her away from a man who had truly cared for her. Now, seeing him happy with someone else, she was filled with regret. She blamed herself for pushing him away, for not seeing his worth when she had the chance. She sat alone in her apartment, her thoughts heavy. I was wrong, she whispered to herself, tears welling up in her eyes. I could have had everything with Joe, but I let my greed destroy it all. It was a painful realization, one that would stay with her for a long time. She had learned the hard way that love wasn't something you could buy, manipulate, or control. True love was built on trust, respect, and genuine care, things she had neglected for the sake of money and status. Meanwhile, Joe and Paulina were enjoying their life together, building a future that was based on love, mutual support, and understanding. They had both grown, healed, and found happiness in each other's arms. Joe had learned to value himself, and Paulina had become the person who loved him for who he truly was, not for his wealth. As for Mildred, she had learned her lesson too late. The pain of losing something precious could never be undone. She realized that in her quest for material things, she had lost the one thing that mattered most: love. Moral lesson: true love cannot be bought, and happiness does not come from wealth or superficial appearances. It is built on respect, trust, and the deep connections we form with others. Never take love for granted, because once it is gone, no amount of money or material things will ever bring it back. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to turn on notifications for more inspiring tales. Stay blessed, and thank you for your support.